What is the creepiest thing that has ever actually happened to you? Story 1. I went on a guided cemetery tour at night. About 6 or 7 of us were standing around a tomb, listening to the story of how the inhabitant had taken his own life with a gun, when all of a sudden there was a big flash, and the whole sky lit up green with smaller flashes. We found out later that we had witnessed a meteor breaking up. The tour guide took a moment, recovered from the surprise, and continued his story about how some decades after the poor man had died, someone broke into his tomb and stole his skull. We then moved on and walked further into the cemetery when we were startled by a loud bang. We shrugged it off as a car backfiring, laughed nervously at how on edge we were, and continued the tour. Shortly after, we heard a couple more bangs in quick succession, and one of the tour party commented that they were pretty sure those were gunshots. There was another bang, closer, definitely a gunshot. Then we saw a light in between some of the headstones, and I promise you, we saw the figure of a man carrying a shotgun, slowly coming from the direction of the tomb we had just visited. We froze. I looked over to the tour guide, thinking it was some prank he played on all his customers, but he was completely pale and backing away. It was a man with a shotgun, and he was walking towards us. He lifted a flashlight and pointed it directly at us. Several of us ducked behind the headstones as he yelled, "Get out of here! What are you doing in this place?" It turned out the city council paid someone to control animals in the cemetery, and they forgot to warn the tour company. Story 2. On a spring break trip, a friend and I got dropped off at the front gate to our condo. A security guard saw us and kept insisting on walking us up to the room. We kept saying no, and he seemed strange. He followed us into the elevator, and I stood as close as I could to the buttons. He kept making odd comments and telling us how attractive we were. We kept mentioning how all of our boyfriends and our guy friends were in the room waiting for us, and how there were about 10 people staying there. When the elevator hit our floor, we took off running as fast as we could. 2 weeks later, after we came home, there was a news story about the same security guard. He had followed a girl onto the elevator and assaulted her before letting her go. Story 3. I was vacationing in the Bahamas when I was 14 with some family friends. My friend and I were getting henna tattoos at the hotel, and there was a man lingering around us. But we did not think much of it because a lot of people would stop to see what was going on. After mine was done, I told my friend and her mom I was going back to the room to get ready for dinner. There were 2 ways to the other side of the hotel, either inside through a row of small stores or outside along the pool. I walked through the inside and got to the elevator, where I saw the same man who had been watching us already waiting. We got on together, and he gestured for me to choose my floor button first. I pressed it, but he did not choose another floor. Alarms started going off in my head, but what could I do? I was stuck in an elevator. The elevator stopped on my floor, and I started walking to my room. In this hotel, all the rooms face the ocean, so to the right were just windows. I was in the very last room on that floor, and I could see the man following me about 10 feet behind. About 2 doors from my room, he ran up and grabbed me. I kicked and screamed, and he dropped me onto the floor. I ran to the room and locked myself in. After talking with security and giving a description, they found the man and discovered he had been attacking multiple women in the building. I never get off an elevator unless everyone else gets off first. Story 4. This is true in my experience, but I am not saying something paranormal happened. When I used to go to college, I had to cut through a particular cemetery. The one attached to this church lacked space, so very few people had been buried there since the 1900s. Under one tree was the grave of a very young girl, just on its own. It said her name and the date she died, which was the year 1885, at the age of 12. I do not know why, but I always got a solemn feeling as I walked past that grave every single day. Eventually, it consumed me. I had no idea why I was getting that feeling walking past the grave, so I searched her name online. Within about a week, I had found out who she was and why she was buried there. She had died from a lung illness. According to the family Bible, she passed away peacefully in her mother's arms. Shortly after she died, her family left Brighton and founded a private school near London. From what I could tell, the family never once returned to Brighton to visit her grave. I worked with the family biographer for a while, digging up as much as we could about this girl, because he had barely heard of her apart from the death certificate and the mention in the family Bible. It was as if they erased her from the last 50 years of their life. After a while, the trail went cold. I still thought often about how sad it was that this girl never had her family visit her after she died. And once again, those thoughts consumed me. I fell asleep one night and dreamed of her and her father. She told me she was fine now. I never dreamed of her again after that point, and the uneasy feeling went away as I walked past her grave. A couple of months later, the man I was working with emailed me a picture. He had found a photograph of her. The problem was that it was a death photograph, because in that time period it was too expensive to regularly hire a photographer. So the only existing picture of her is from the day she died. The surprising part was that the girl in that photograph looked exactly like the girl that I saw in my dream, the one that told me she was fine now. Up until I left England, I left flowers by her grave. This was the only grave in the whole cemetery which ever had flowers by it. My friends still do it to this day, because nobody deserves to be forgotten, even in death. Story 5. I have been waiting a long time to tell the full story of the Whistler. This story requires many details, but it is unexplainable, creepy, and completely true. I also have video evidence. When I was about 8 years old, I was taking my dog for a walk through the neighborhood with my mom. It was maybe 11 o'clock at night. We lived next to a swamp and wooded area on the edge of our neighborhood in Lansing, Michigan. I remember it being very silent and slightly windy. From down in the swamp, we heard somebody whistling at us. It sounded sort of like a bird, but each whistle was different enough that the lack of consistency made it seem human. The whistle sounded higher, then lower. I cannot really describe it. My mom had a concerned, slightly terrified look on her face, grabbed my hand and said that we should go inside quickly. I did not understand because I was too young, but seeing my mom so unsettled made me scared too. After a while, I kind of forgot about it. 2 years later, I was taking my dog out again late at night. There was a large bush that could easily hide a person just next to the front door. As I was finishing the walk, the whistling noise started again, with the same pitches and the same inconsistent human-like tones. As soon as I heard it, a chill went down my spine as I remembered the feeling of seeing my mom looking down into the swamp at something I could not see. I ran inside as fast as possible. Years went by, and I thought about it less and less. I told only a handful of people, and eventually it slipped from my mind. Fast forward to last summer, I was 24, started dating my girlfriend Sarah, and we moved out to South Dakota for work. For Independence Day, we decided to go to Pierre, South Dakota, and watch the fireworks along the bank of the Missouri River. There was a free camping spot behind a hospital where you could pitch your tent, hang out, and see the fireworks up the river. We were near the end of the campground, and there were very few people around us. As it was getting dark, the fireworks began. They were pretty far away, so the illumination was very little. We had to sit right at the edge of the river to see them. A huge thunderhead was moving in, and a storm was imminent, so the air seemed electric and the wind was picking up. The atmosphere was eerie, to say the least. The police boats herded all the other boats off of the river and left our area to do that elsewhere. Most of the other campers walked up the river to have a better view of the fireworks, but Sarah and I stayed back and were drinking beers and relaxing. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a paddle dipping into the water. We saw a figure steering a canoe about 20 meters offshore. Sarah decided to go get more drinks from the car, leaving me alone to stare at this mystery person. Then they whistled at me. My entire body was frozen and covered in goosebumps. It was the exact same whistler from my childhood, more than a decade earlier. I looked at the figure, but it was too dark to see clearly. They were wearing a hat. When they were perpendicular to the shore from me, they stopped paddling, turned the canoe to face directly at me, and whistled again. I was so frightened I stood up and shouted, "Who are you?" They did not say anything, just whistled a couple more times, turned the canoe around, and paddled out of sight. I am a videographer, so I already had my camera by my side and was recording the fireworks. As the canoe was almost out of sight, I grabbed my camera and got a shot of them whistling as they went away. When Sarah came back, she was confused as to why I was so shaken. When I explained, she was unnerved too. I was convinced we would be harmed that night. How did this whistling person follow me after 14 years all the way to South Dakota? Was it a coincidence? Why was it the same whistling noise? Who was that person and where did they go? So many questions remain unanswered. To this day, I am more afraid of being outside in the dark, where I might hear that whistling again. I am open to any explanations. If there is interest, I will put together a video of the fireworks, the whistling noise, and the canoe disappearing. I am in Uganda currently and the internet is unreliable where I am, but I will do my best. Story 6. I work in a pub that is about 2 miles away in the next village. I usually finish work late, around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I have to cycle home. The only route is a small road that goes through fairly large woods. There is a 1 mile stretch with absolutely no streetlights, so it is pitch black. As I was cycling through the woods, I started hearing a screeching sound, similar to a small animal in distress. It terrified me, so I started pedaling faster. I continued to hear it, and it seemed to be getting closer. I used my phone's camera light to navigate, although it is not impossible to see without it. I pointed my phone behind me, and I swear I caught sight of some humanoid creature on all fours running at me. Maybe it was just my imagination, but it felt vivid. I continued cycling as fast as I could, and I have been cycling long distances since I was young, so I am quite fast. Yet I kept hearing the screeching and the light padding of footsteps behind me. I tried to turn my phone light off, and after a few seconds I managed to do so. The padding became quieter, and I heard one last screech from whatever it was. I have never been so scared in my entire life. Story 7. I had just gotten a job as a nanny looking after 2 children for a family. I worked the same hours every week, one of the shifts being from 3 in the afternoon until around 10 on Friday nights. Across the road from the family's home was a construction site that I walked past every day. The builders would wave and say hello to me in the mornings and evenings, but one of them took a particular interest in me. He was at least 20 years older than me and often made comments that made me feel uncomfortable. Every morning on my way to work, he would yell out compliments, and in the evenings, he would offer me a ride home in his van. I always declined. Although I felt uneasy, I never really felt unsafe until one day he approached me on the street. When I turned to walk away after he said something particularly vulgar, he grabbed my arm roughly and said, "Don't you dare walk away from me." From then on, I was much more wary of him. The family's house was a 2-story home with all the bedrooms and bathrooms upstairs and the living area and kitchen downstairs. The downstairs area was surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass windows. One night after the children were in bed, I was upstairs. I admit I was snooping in the parents' room, so I was listening carefully for any signs of them arriving home, as they were due back early that night. While upstairs, I heard a noise that sounded like the gate. I peeked out of a window that overlooked the front yard, just in time to see a black sports bag being thrown over the high fence. After the bag came a bat and then a man. It took me a couple of seconds to realize what was happening, and then I saw that the man was the builder. I completely froze. I watched him walk across the yard and down the side of the house, and then the lights cut out. I had no idea what to do. My phone was downstairs, and because of all the windows, there was no way I could get to it without being seen. The only way out of the house was downstairs. I could hear him walking around the house, rattling windows and trying door handles. I was panicking when I heard a car come down the driveway. The parents had arrived home. I stayed hidden upstairs with the baby until I heard them come inside and call my name. I ran downstairs hysterically and they immediately called the police. The man was never found, and I never saw him again. They tried to track him down through the building site, but everyone there was very tight-lipped about who worked with them. It seemed like there were a lot of shady, unlicensed people coming in and out of that place. What I learned from this experience is the importance of breaking up your routine whenever you can. I used to catch the same bus at the same time every day, get off at the same stop, go to the same grocery store each morning, and walk the same way to work. I believe this routine helped the man figure out where I would be and when. I do not let myself think about what might have happened if the parents had not arrived home when they did. Story 8. I was working as an emergency medical technician on the 4 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon shift. We picked up our rig and were told to post, meaning to hang out and wait for a call in a very rough part of town. I parked behind a shopping center where all the businesses had closed down because of the lack of people in the area. It was mostly trailer parks, very run-down apartments, and abandoned buildings. I picked this place because the sun was going to rise in an hour or so, and my partner and I both wanted to take a nap until a call came through the radio. My partner had no problem sleeping while sitting straight up in the front of the ambulance. I could not do that, so I went in the back and laid down on the bench to try and nap. The thing about our old ambulance was that you could not open the side door from the inside. So I had to get out, go through the side door, and then lay down. I left the side door a little cracked open, so when a call came, I could jump into the front to respond. About 5 minutes after I lay down, I heard my partner call me. "Hey, are you awake?" "Yeah, what's up?" "That person over there has been staring at us for a while." Across the street was a sidewalk along the side of a park. I could make out a faint shadow of a person. I knew it was someone because their cigarette butt flickered every time they took a puff. The streetlight was dim, but I could tell they were standing there, just staring at us. It was unsettling, so we watched them for a bit. After about 5 more minutes of watching, the person walked away. We joked about how weird people were, being up at 5 in the morning roaming around some sketchy park. I lay back down and started to doze off. I woke up to my partner shouting, "Oh my God!" I popped my head up into the front cabin. The person was standing about 20 feet from our ambulance, dressed in all black, staring at him with eyes locked. She looked like something out of a horror movie. She had pitch black straight hair, very pale skin, and the streetlight made her look white as paper. My partner was absolutely terrified, locked in some kind of staring match with her. I told him to hop into the driver's seat and get out of there. He said, "I can't." I'm too scared to move. I realized I had to squeeze from the back through the tight space to get into the driver's seat myself. I jumped up and tried to get into the front cabin. It was a tight squeeze because I am a bigger guy, but I managed. She noticed me moving and started power walking straight toward us. I was more terrified than I had ever been in my life. As she got closer, I realized she was looking at the side door I had left cracked open. I panicked, thinking, "I forgot to close it." I got a good look at her face. She noticed that door, and I knew she was going to try to get in. Her whole body was shaking as she got closer and closer, still staring at my partner. She reached his window and just stared at us both in the eyes. I made it into the front with barely a second to spare, started the ambulance, and sped off. We never posted in that spot again. Story 9. I had just gotten home from the gym and was exhausted. I badly needed to shower and sleep, so I headed upstairs. As soon as my bedroom door came into view, what I can only describe as a dark, humanoid-looking silhouette moved out of sight from the side of my doorframe. I was absolutely certain I had seen something and was not eager to investigate it. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, convinced myself that I was an adult who could handle it, counted down from 5, kicked my halfway closed bedroom door all the way open, and started yelling like a maniac. I was home alone. I did not find anything or anyone. I checked every closet, under the bed, all the usual places. Out of habit, I closed the door and began to undress when the only light in my room suddenly burned out. It was absolutely pitch black. Considering how positive I was that I had seen something earlier, I started to panic. I had this overwhelming sense of dread and absolute impending doom. I felt like there was a hand just inches away from the back of my neck. The sensation was so vivid and terrifying that I bolted for the door after about 5 to 10 seconds of being too afraid to move, and I ran out of the house until the rest of my family came home. Pretty anticlimactic, I know, but to this day I have never felt so convinced that there was another unwelcome presence in my home. Story 10. I used to work tables in a restaurant. One day, a man I had never interacted with before came up to me and handed me a framed picture, smiling nervously. I looked at it, and it was a picture of me sitting at the staff table. I was done eating and just staring off, probably thinking about something random. He explained timidly that he thought I was so pretty that he took my picture, framed it, and wanted me to have it so I would see how beautiful I was and hold on to it forever. It was meant as a sweet gesture, but it came across as unsettling. 5 seconds later, the manager walked by, heard the story, burst out laughing, and decided it was perfect to hang the picture in the back, on the wall next to the work schedules where everyone could see it every day. Everybody laughed, and then we kind of forgot about it. The picture just became part of the wall. It has been 8 years since I worked there. The staff has changed, the managers have changed, and everyone I knew has moved on, and except for my best work friend. You know, that one person who could probably do another job but stays there out of habit and loyalty. She decided to keep the picture. She told the new managers that the girl on the wall was a waitress who had worked there and tragically died in an accident, and that the staff had framed her picture to honor her memory because she loved the place so much. 8 years later, when I occasionally visit the restaurant to say hello to my friend, I still glance above the schedules and see the picture hanging there. Story 11. My mother called me one day. "Did you use me as a job reference?" she asked. "You have to let me know if you do that." She had mentioned once that since we had different last names, she would be happy to lie for me if any employers asked, but I had never taken her up on it. Yet someone had called her, asking questions about me. I brushed it off. A few days later, my stepmother, Linda, called with a similar story. She said the woman on the phone was really sweet and just wanted to check references I had supposedly given her. Linda and I also have different names, and aside from her marriage license to my father, there was nothing connecting us. Somebody was clearly calling around to check up on me. Linda gave me the caller ID number, but when I tried calling back, it went straight to a voicemail with a generic default message. A week later, I got a call on my band's booking number, which was a Google Voice line I used for that purpose only. "Hello," the woman said. "I found your band online and want to book you. Do you have a show coming up where we could see you?" The caller ID matched. It was her. I panicked. I should have named a place and waited for her there. But instead I asked, "Why did you call my family?" She flusteredly denied it, made a quick excuse, and hung up. Calling back went straight to voicemail again. To this day, I never got an answer about who she was or why she did it. Story 12. Something similar happened to me about 5 years ago. I got into a very minor car accident where I rolled into the back of someone's car. We exchanged numbers, and I went on my way. That night was my brother's graduation party from Marine Corps boot camp, so I celebrated with him and his friends at my house. My phone died, and I slept until around 4 in the afternoon the next day. My brother woke me up and told me that the man I had gotten into the accident with had called his phone and left a message looking for me. That was strange because I had no idea how he got my brother's number. It was only one digit off from mine, so maybe he had dialed wrong and thought it was me. But then I got a call from my girlfriend's stepmother saying she had also received a phone call from the man, saying he was looking for me because of the accident. That unnerved me because I didn't even have her number myself. Then my uncle in Michigan called with the same story. My uncle and I have different last names, and I was living in California at the time. At that point, I started to freak out. I had no clue how this man got their phone numbers. Later, my grandmother messaged me on Facebook saying she too had received a strange call from the man, but he hung up when she asked how he had gotten her number. I called the police and explained everything, asking them to contact him and tell him to stop harassing my family. I do not know if they ever did, but I told my insurance company about it and requested absolutely no contact with him. For a few months after that, I kept getting unsettling phone calls from different numbers. The caller never said anything, just listened for 30 to 45 seconds before hanging up. It was always a different number and always happened around 10 at night. I never figured out if it was connected, but it was the first time in my life I truly felt vulnerable and uneasy. Story 13. I have been waiting for a thread like this so I could finally share my story. I also want to see if anyone in the area heard or saw what happened. This is more frightening than creepy, and it happened within the past 2 years. It took place in Ohio, about 10 to 15 miles north of Delaware, in a rural area. I am being vague because I do not want to give away too many personal details. It was summer, and my family was having a cookout. All the adults, including me, were inside talking while the kids played outside. Suddenly, we all heard a huge boom, to this day the loudest sound I have ever heard, and about 3 seconds later, after we had frozen in shock, we felt the vibration go through the house. That snapped us out of it, and we rushed outside to check on the kids and see what had happened. It honestly sounded like what I would imagine a bomb or explosion would sound like. The kids were fine, some of them were scared, others said they didn't hear it, which was baffling. We saw nothing in the sky, and nothing around us looked unusual. My boyfriend and I got in the car and drove about 2 miles in each direction, but we found nothing. I kept checking news reports afterward, but nothing was ever mentioned. The whole thing was terrifying, and the fact that no news outlet covered it makes it even more unsettling. There is no way it was just a gunshot, even though some of my family tried to say that once we calmed down. It was something much bigger, and not knowing what it was is going to drive me crazy for a long time. Story 14. In the late 1980s, when I was about 13, my friend and I spent a lot of time exploring miles of abandoned apartment complexes that were eventually torn down to make room for the 105 freeway in Downey, California. I believe the properties had been taken through eminent domain and tons of belongings had been left behind by the tenants. To us, it felt like an Indiana Jones-style adventure. One evening as it was getting dark, we came across a room in one of the apartments that was filled with disturbing items. An inflatable doll, stacks of adult magazines, and even a bag full of rubber body parts, among other things. There was also a mattress on the floor and clothes still hanging in the closet. Being reckless kids, we started grabbing random things we thought were interesting. I began flipping through the clothes in the closet. About halfway through, I noticed that under the last coat there were pants and boots. When I looked up, I realized there was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, standing in the corner of the closet. He was completely still, eyes wide open, staring right at me. For a few seconds, I just stood there frozen, unable to accept what I was seeing because it was getting darker, and my mind didn't want to believe it. After that moment of staring at each other, I simply turned and walked out of the room, found my friend, and we both ran to his house as fast as we could. We told his uncle what happened, but all he did was yell at us and take away the things we had taken from the apartment. Story 15. I posted this a while back in a different thread like this, but it never got much attention. It is fairly long, and I apologize for the wall of text, but when I first wrote it, I tried to be as detailed as possible. Back in the early 1990s, I was around 13 years old and used to spend a lot of time at my grandparents' house in a very rural area of southeast Arkansas. When I say rural, I mean you had to take a series of dirt roads to get out to their place. The nearest neighbors, besides my aunt and uncle, about a quarter of a mile up the road, were over a mile and a half away. It was farmland, woods, and total isolation. The closest town was about 10 miles away. My grandparents had lived in that house since my mother was a child, and both of them had grown up just down the road. There was a small country general store roughly 3 or 4 miles away, run by an elderly couple. Its only customers were the people who lived scattered around the area. One day my grandmother asked me if I wanted to walk to the store to pick up some milk, eggs, and a few other items. She gave me some money and I headed out. It was early in the day and I figured I had plenty of time to get back before dark, which I always made sure to do. Out there, once the sun set, the woods became pitch black, a kind of darkness most people who live in cities will never experience. Being 13, I had poor time management skills. On the way, I stopped at the creek near a small wooden bridge and wasted time catching crawdads and just messing around. By the time I actually left the store, it was already getting close to dark. It was fall and night came early. I hurried as best I could, sprinting in stretches, but it was not enough. By the time I reached the hill near the bridge, it was almost fully dark, with a bright, nearly full moon casting an eerie glow across the land. At the top of the hill, the road leveled out straight, with woods on the left and a large open field on the right. From there, about half a mile ahead, I could see the faint lights of my grandparents' house. I felt relief knowing I was close, but I was also uneasy. My eyes had adjusted to the moonlight, and the field was dimly lit. As I walked, I heard movement behind me on the wooded side of the road, like leaves rustling. I turned and at first saw nothing. Then as my eyes focused, I saw a black shadowy shape crawling in the ditch, slowly moving toward me. At first I thought it was a dog, but it was too large and it was crawling like a person. A jolt of fear hit me when I realized it was trying to sneak up on me. Then suddenly it stood up. It rose out of the ditch on 2 legs, shaped like a man but towering at 7 or 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair. Its arms and legs were long, human-like, but its face was shadowed. I knew immediately it was not a bear or any animal I had ever seen. I dropped the bag of groceries and ran as fast as I could toward my grandparents' house. Behind me I could hear its guttural breathing, its footsteps pounding on the gravel as it gave chase. I refused to look back, certain it would grab me. Then just as suddenly I heard it veer off into the woods and let out an unearthly, bone-shattering scream that I will never forget. By the time I burst through my grandparents' door, my heart felt like it would explode. In a panicked mess I tried to explain, but my grandmother just told me it must have been a dog or some animal. She looked unsettled, though, and refused to discuss it. The next morning, I found my grandfather whittling wood under a shade tree. He was a rational man, born and raised in those woods, who knew every inch of the land and every animal in it. I told him what I had seen, certain of what I knew. He stopped carving, looked me in the eyes, and said, "I know what you saw. I've seen it before, too. There are things out in those woods that people don't understand and that you shouldn't mess with." His words gave me both affirmation and fear. He told me about a cave far back in the woods, at the base of some cliffs, where the creature lived. Years earlier, while hunting, he had seen one emerge from that cave, screaming and throwing rocks at him. He fired a shot, missed, and it chased him. He escaped, but as he made his way home, he felt it stalking him, and when he reached his porch, he saw it watching from the trees. That night, he and my grandmother were terrorized by it. Large rocks hit the house, the doorknobs rattled, the porch creaked under heavy footsteps, and an inhuman garbled voice muttered outside. Finally, he fired his shotgun into the darkness, and it fled. He said he never saw it again, though strange incidents like mutilated livestock and missing dogs continued to happen in the area. My grandmother refused to ever acknowledge it again. My grandfather passed away about 10 years ago, but I will never forget what he told me. You can believe it or not. It makes no difference to me. I know what I saw, and my grandfather knew what he saw. Neither of us felt the need to convince anyone. Until today, I have never told this story to anyone but him. Story 16. All right, a few people who were involved know this story, but I warn you, it is hard to believe. Back in 2002, I heard an ungodly noise outside my front door, something between a barking dog and a cat being strangled. I live in a town right in the middle of a large forest, so wildlife is normal. When I went outside, I found a small deer stuck in a metal fence. It was one of those fences with large square sections, and this little guy had gotten his head stuck. His horns worked like barbs, trapping him. Later I learned it was a male muntjac, a small but tough-looking deer with horns and tusks, though harmless. I decided I could not leave him there, but freeing him meant he might run into the road and get hit by a car. Since I was about half a mile from the forest edge, I freed him, picked him up, and started carrying him into the woods. He was heavier than I expected and had cut himself badly trying to escape. He fought nearly the whole way, kicking and jerking his head so violently I thought I might end up with a horn in my face. By the time we reached the forest, I was exhausted and covered in blood. Once I set him down, he barely moved. He was too weak to fight anymore. If I left him, he would be an easy target for predators, and after carrying him that far, I could not just abandon him. I ran home, grabbed bottles of water, and came back. He was still there, gasping. I sat with him for about 2 hours, giving him sips of water from my hand and cleaning his wounds. His fur was falling out around his neck from where he had struggled, but I washed it as best I could. Eventually, he leaped up and ran off into the forest. He did not look back. He just disappeared into the trees. I brushed myself off and walked home, oddly proud of myself. About a year and a half later, I was walking my usual 4-mile route through the forest after work. I had never seen more than the occasional roe deer, fox or badger on that path. That evening, as I rounded a corner, I startled the largest badger I had ever seen. Instead of running, it charged toward me, making a terrible huffing noise. I froze, thinking, really? Killed by a badger? When suddenly something rustled ahead of me. What I thought was a dog came tearing out of the woods, sprinted past me, and slammed straight into the badger, knocking it off the trail. In shock, I turned to watch as the strange dog chased the badger, ramming it again and again till both vanished into the woods. Then the animal trotted back toward me and stopped about 20 yards away. It was not a dog. It was a small, odd-looking deer, with a bald patch still visible around its neck. Story 17. I have lots of stories, but this is the only one that still unsettles me. I used to work as a slot repair technician in a Native American casino that was said to be haunted. Before it was a casino, it had been a community center where wakes and viewings were held. When I was first hired, there was confusion about when the employee I was replacing would retire, so I had to spend a month working in the kitchen. I carried a radio to announce when orders were ready. After 3 weeks, I had noticed small odd things. Freezer doors open that I knew I had shut, sinks running with no one nearby. One slow day, I decided to close the order window and take my lunch early. I tried calling my manager on the radio 3 or 4 times, but every time I keyed it, the radio emitted a loud buzzing whine. Frustrated, I picked up the phone, but the line was dead. Eventually, I flagged down a supervisor through the window and told her I was taking a break. I locked up the kitchen and left for 20 minutes. When I returned, everything was strangely quiet. There were no customers, so I began restocking shelves. As I crossed the kitchen, I clearly heard the voice of the same supervisor I had spoken to earlier say, "You shouldn't have gone." I turned and asked, "What?" But no one was there. I checked the corners of the kitchen, and I was completely alone. Just as I realized that, the radio keyed itself on, letting out that same loud whine, like when two radios are too close together. Terrified, I switched it off. Looking out the order window, I saw no one. As I turned to leave, the heavy door of the walk-in freezer across the kitchen swung open. If you have ever seen those doors, you know how solid they are. They do not just swing open. That was enough for me. I left the kitchen and told my supervisor I was not going back. The kitchen stayed closed until the next shift. All the managers believed in the ghost. The ceiling was full of black dome security cameras, and they swore they had each seen the ghost reflected behind them at some point. Some members of the cash team even quit after claiming to see a woman standing in the cameras. I was relieved when my assignment in the kitchen ended a week later. I never wanted to set foot in that part of the casino again. Story 18. Growing up, my mom was a bartender and a single parent, so I was the one who took care of my little brother most nights. One evening, while I was making dinner, I kept hearing a strange whistling sound. At first, I thought it was just the storm outside, since it was raining and windy. But the whistling continued, and soon it started to sound like a melody instead of just random wind noise. I started getting uneasy and asked my little brother if he heard it too. He said no. Eventually, the whistling stopped, though the storm kept raging. Later that night, I was climbing up the ladder to my bunk bed when my television suddenly shut off. I assumed the power went out, but then I noticed the hallway light was still on. I tried turning the television back on, and it did not work. When I reached behind the stand, I realized the cord had been unplugged. At that exact moment, the whistling started again, but this time it was not in the distance. It sounded like someone was whistling directly into my ear. I could almost feel the breath on my skin. Chills ran down my spine, and before I could think, I bolted out of the apartment screaming. We lived in a small building with 3 other units, so I woke the neighbors upstairs, a young couple with 2 kids. They offered to check out our apartment. At first, the man looked like he thought I was just a kid overreacting, but when he came back out a few minutes later, his whole demeanor had changed. He looked uneasy and even asked if we were playing a prank on him. I told him no, and he could tell by my terrified face and my brother's that we were telling the truth. He said he had not found anyone inside, but he was convinced someone had been there. They let us stay in their apartment until my mom came home from work, because even they did not feel comfortable leaving us alone. I never heard that whistling again, but so many other strange things happened to my brother and me in that apartment that I am convinced it was haunted. To this day, it was the most terrified I have ever been in my life. Story 19. I rarely tell this story because it makes no sense, and I have no explanation for it. When I was younger, I moved to Atlanta for an internship. I was broke, so I relied on public transit. I encountered plenty of strange people on trains, but I always managed to avoid them. On my last day in the city, I took the train to the airport. A very large man approached me, much taller and broader than me, dressed casually. He did not ask me for anything, not my number, not money, nothing. He just talked to me with the confidence of someone who assumed I was not going anywhere. I followed my usual safety routine, keeping a straight face, gripping my belongings tightly, and preparing to move if necessary. When I got off at my stop, he got off too. There was no pretense about it. He was deliberately following me. He walked with me, stayed with me on the escalator, and then, without warning, he put his hand over mine on my suitcase handle. I froze, stunned. I held on tightly, refusing to let go, thinking, what is he doing? My instinct should have been to shout or pull away, but I was so shocked and scared that I could not react. He looked around as if trying to decide what to do next, and I realized how vulnerable I was. Suddenly, without explanation, he just let go, turned, and walked away. I made my flight and left Atlanta, but I still wonder what was going through his mind. Why follow me all that way? Why make such a deliberate move only to abandon it? He did not seem unstable or deranged, just calm, controlled, and strange. To this day, it remains the creepiest encounter I have ever had. Story 20. Where I live, there is a train that goes from my school to my home, about a 15-minute ride. One day, my friend and I boarded the train together after school. We were supposed to get off at Station 5. The ride usually goes like this: Station 1 where we board, then Stations 2, 3, 4, and finally 5. Each stop takes about 3 minutes. We boarded at 3 o'clock, sat down, and started chatting. We have taken this train more than 100 times, so we know the route by heart, the scenery, the announcements, even landmarks like the school we always see near Station 4. As usual, the announcer called out each station. We heard Station 4 announced, and we both saw the landmark outside. Then we kept talking, and when we finally got off, we expected it to be Station 5. Instead, we looked around and realized we were at Station 8. At first, we thought we had just missed our stop, but when we checked the time, it was 3:15. That was impossible. To reach Station 8, the train would normally arrive closer to 3:25. The train was automated, meaning the distance and timing never changed. There was no way 15 minutes could have passed and taken us that far. We were both confused and unsettled because we had clearly seen Station 4 just before. We took the opposite train back, discussing it in disbelief. To this day, neither of us can explain how we jumped ahead 3 stations in only 15 minutes. It still creeps me out whenever I think about it. Story 21. My unsettling experience happened a couple of years ago, and I had completely forgotten about it until about a month ago. So had my boyfriend, who was with me at the time. It happened in July of 2012 when we were on vacation. My boyfriend had inherited a small house on an island in Brittany, France, called Ile de Groix. The island sits a few kilometers off the southern coast of Brittany, and the only way to get there is by ferry. It is small with only a handful of year-round residents, but beautiful and quiet, a perfect place to escape. We often took walks and rides around the island at all hours. One clear night around midnight, with the moonlight bright and strong, we went out as usual. We headed to a beach that ran alongside a family vacation village. The layout was like this. A curved road bordered the village, and on the other side was a strip of grass and sand where you could look down at the beach and see below. The road and village sat on a sort of cliff, and the only way down was a narrow set of stairs a few meters away. My boyfriend and I stood there for about 10 minutes, gazing at the sea. The night was calm, quiet, and we had not seen anyone else during our ride. There were no swimmers, no groups of young people partying on the sand. It was deserted. Then suddenly we saw something. Straight ahead, a human-shaped figure rose from the sea and moved across the beach. At first it seemed ordinary, but then we noticed it was pitch black, absorbing all the moonlight instead of reflecting any, like a pure shadow. Stranger still, it had never appeared swimming. It seemed to emerge upright, as though it had walked along the sea floor until it surfaced. We had been staring at the water the entire time and had seen nothing before this. As we watched, dread filled us. The figure slid across the sand toward the base of the cliff below us. It did not walk or run. Its legs did not move at all. It just glided unnaturally fast, leaving no trail or footprints. Its form was human in shape and size, but featureless, faceless, completely black. My boyfriend, who rarely gets shaken, was as unnerved as I was. When the thing was only a few meters from the base of the cliff, we finally broke our silence and bolted, leaving with a deep, indescribable sense of dread. We never saw it again, and nothing else strange happened during the rest of our vacation. Still, I will never forget the image of that pitch-black figure sliding silently toward us. Story 22. A close friend of mine lives in a beautiful house, practically a villa, and since we are best friends, I often stayed over there almost every weekend. Every so often, maybe once or twice a month, he would tell me about strange things happening in the house. Sounds of glass shattering when nothing was broken, odd noises, and so on. Most of it happened when he was alone, so I assumed it was just his imagination. One weekend, I stayed over again. We played games late into the night until we were too tired to continue. As we were settling down, we heard footsteps. His mother and younger brother were at home, but they were asleep. He went to check on them and confirmed they were not moving around. Yet the footsteps continued. Being 18-year-olds, we thought we could handle it. Armed with wooden practice swords and a knife, we went downstairs slowly. By the time we reached the bottom floor, the noises had stopped. We checked everywhere, every hallway, every room, but found nothing. Then I remembered one place we had not checked, a back room used as a lounge. Figuring there was nothing there, I went in alone. The room was empty, but when I turned around to leave, a chilling realization hit me. If someone or something had been in there, I would have been trapped, vulnerable, with no way out. That thought shook me to my core. Afterward, I was too unsettled to sleep for 6 hours. To this day, I have no explanation for the footsteps we heard. It might sound minor when written down, but in the moment, it was deeply unnerving. Story 23. When I was about 3 years old, I was on a family vacation in the Philippines. I woke up from a nap in the evening and went to the kitchen, where my mom told me everyone besides her and my grandpa had gone for a walk. She handed me a plate of food and said they had already eaten. Since it was stuffy inside, I decided to sit outside on the back patio to eat. I sat at one end of a long, narrow table and started pushing food onto my spoon with my hand, since I did not yet know how to use utensils properly. When I looked up, I saw my grandpa sitting at the other end of the table, eating with a spoon and fork. I watched him carefully and mimicked his movements. By the end of my meal, I had figured out how to use both utensils together. We both stood up at the same time, and then my mom called my name. Excited, I ran back into the kitchen with my plate and told her that Grandpa had taught me how to eat with a spoon and fork. She looked confused and said Grandpa had already eaten dinner and was sitting on the front porch the entire time. I ran to the front porch and saw him in his rocking chair. I ran back to the patio. No one was there, and there was no plate. To explain how I might not have recognized him, this was my first time meeting my grandpa in person, and my brother had told me scary stories about him, so I had avoided looking directly at him out of fear. For years, I told myself a ghost had taught me. But as I got older, another thought came. What if it had been an attempted kidnapping? I remember we both stood up at the same time, and when my mom called out, I immediately dashed inside. The door was only a few meters behind me. I had not been running out of fear, only to answer her. But when I think about it now, the idea chills me. Story 24. I used to live in a rented house across from a busy city park. At night, when the park was empty, I would sit on my porch to watch the trees and stars. One night, around 1 in the morning, I stepped outside and froze. Standing directly across from my house in the empty park was a man. He was dressed all in black and wore a Halloween-style skull mask. It looked detailed but cheap, like something store-bought. The sight sent a chill down my spine. He stood completely still, not moving, and I knew he could see me. The entire neighborhood was silent as we stared at each other for a long time. Finally, he turned and walked away casually. I called the police, figuring he was casing the neighborhood, but nothing ever came of it. A few months later, I was doing yard work along the side of my house. While pulling weeds from a thicket beneath my kitchen window, I saw something that looked like trash. I picked it up, and it was the very same mask I had seen that night. Story 25. Just after high school, I was dating a girl, and we spent the summer at my mom's house. One morning, she lost her glasses and could not find them anywhere. Later, while she showered upstairs, I was outside washing my car. I was almost done when she came out wearing her glasses. I asked where she had found them, and she gave me a strange look and said I had given them to her. Confused, I told her I had been outside the whole time. She swore I had opened the bathroom door, set them on the counter while she was in the shower, and then walked away. That rattled me, because we were the only ones home. She began panicking, so I grabbed a baseball bat and we went inside to check the house. We searched every possible hiding spot and finally went upstairs to my brother's room. I pushed open the door to his bathroom, which opened inward, and between the crack, I saw the outline of a person hiding in the narrow space between the door and the wall. In that instant, I froze in fear. It only lasted a second, but felt like minutes. I swung the bat hard at the door, bracing myself for a reaction. But there was no cry, no sound at all. When I pulled the door back, I realized it was only my brother's bathrobe hanging on a hook. My girlfriend, though, never stopped insisting that someone had entered the bathroom and set her glasses down. To this day, I have no explanation, and we never found anyone else in the house. Story 26. When I was younger, I often dreamed of a ghostly blue figure of an old man walking through our house. In the dream, he always followed the exact same path. He would move from the kitchen to the dining room, then to the living room, climb the stairs, pass by my bedroom at the top, walk along the short hallway, and finally disappear into the wall at the end instead of using the door. Each time he reached that wall, I woke up. His movements never varied. One arm slightly forward, face blank, gliding instead of stepping, drifting straight through furniture. The most unnerving part was how real it felt. I had this dream nearly every week for over 10 years, but only when I slept in that house. The moment I left for college, it stopped, though it came back whenever I returned home on breaks. I have not had it once since I stopped sleeping in that bedroom more than 13 years ago, which made me think the house itself was haunted. Years later, when visiting home, I asked my parents about renovations in that part of the house. I was curious if, like other houses in the neighborhood, ours had once had a back staircase. My dad said yes, and he lifted ceiling tiles in the kitchen to show me where it had been. The top of those stairs had led directly to the very spot in the wall where, in my dreams, the old man always disappeared. I did not want to admit that, so I shrugged it off and suggested someone had removed the stairs to make more space. My dad gave me a serious look and said no, that was not why. A previous owner had her husband die in the house, and she believed his spirit haunted it. She had the staircase removed and the doorway sealed, thinking it would keep him from returning. My parents later reopened that doorway. That alone was unsettling, but then I asked my dad why he had even wondered if the house was haunted enough to ask the neighbor about it. His reply left me speechless. He said he too had recurring dreams of an old man walking the exact same route: kitchen, dining room, living room, up the stairs, past my bedroom, down the hall, and into that same wall. We stared at each other, both stunned, realizing we had lived in the same house for years, haunted by the same dream of the same figure. Story 27. After finishing college, I moved into a new apartment on my own. At first, I enjoyed the independence, but living by myself took adjustment. For the first few weeks before I bought a bed, I slept on an air mattress on the floor. That is when the sleep paralysis began. The first incident was terrifying. A large, dark figure cracked my bedroom door open and stared at me. At the time, I had no idea what sleep paralysis was. I thought something truly paranormal was happening. I started keeping a gun near me at night out of fear. Then I had my first dream. I remember it vividly. I was walking into work when a stranger approached from the opposite direction. It was Denzel Washington. I had seen him in the movie Fallen, which dealt with demonic possession, so my mind must have tied him to that imagery. In the dream, he asked me my name. I told him. Then he laughed and vanished. I woke up with my heart racing, but not afraid, just unsettled. The paralysis worsened. The figure progressed from standing in my doorway to standing at the foot of my bed, and finally to sitting on top of me. Imagine your worst fear, a shadowy figure you can see, hear, and feel, pinning you down while knowing your name. That became my nightly reality. I dreaded going to sleep and even considered checking into a hotel, but I stayed. Eventually, I called my mom. She is deeply religious, and though I expected alarm, she calmly told me she would pray for me. That night, I dreamed again of walking into work. Denzel appeared at the same spot as before. He smiled at me, but then I heard my mother's voice say firmly, "Leave him alone." "You cannot bother him instantly." His smile twisted into a scowl. He raised his fist to strike me, but before he touched me, I woke up, paralyzed with the black figure on my chest. At that exact moment, I heard an impossibly loud clap of thunder, and the figure leapt off me and flew out the window. My heart pounded, but I was suddenly overwhelmed by peace. I sat in bed processing it all, then eventually went back to sleep without fear. The next day, I called my mom to tell her what happened. She responded as though she already knew, calm and unsurprised. Since that night, I have never experienced sleep paralysis or those kinds of dreams again. Story 28. I have a story to share that not many people know, but it has a happy ending, and maybe it can save someone's life. In 1983, I was 21 years old, working as a bartender in a popular nightclub. One night, around 3 in the morning, I was driving home along Interstate 95 in Connecticut. It was raining hard and my gas tank was nearly empty, though I thought I had enough to make it home. A white van passed me in the slow lane, and something about it immediately put me on edge. The driver hid his face as he went by, and I noticed it had New York plates. A few minutes later, I realized the van had moved behind me and was keeping pace, maintaining its distance. When I took the exit toward home, the van followed. My panic grew. I could not pull into my house because I did not want him to know where I lived. Nearly out of gas, I kept driving and made a right turn away from home to test if he was following. Sure enough, his headlights appeared in the mirror, making the same turn. I drove past a convenience store hoping to see a police car, but the lot was empty. It was dark, pouring rain, and the town was deserted. I knew the only option was to head for the police station about 7 miles away. Those miles felt endless. The van followed me through every turn. When I finally pulled into the police station lot, he was still behind me, until I parked in front of the building and ran inside. At that moment, the van sped away. I was so shaken that when I reached the officer inside, I could not speak at first. I had never been so paralyzed by fear. In the end, I was safe, my car had not run out of gas, and I had made it to the station. The lesson I took from that night: always be prepared. Keep your phone charged, your gas tank filled, and stay aware of what is happening around you, especially when driving at night. Story 29. A close friend of mine, let's call her Sylvia, came home late one night after a movie with friends. As she walked down the hallway toward her bedroom, she saw the figure of a middle-aged man standing at the foot of her bed, facing the doorway. She froze, then slowly backed away, deciding she would sleep in the living room instead. But when she passed through the kitchen, her dog suddenly leapt up, growling into the dark living room. Using the light from her phone, Sylvia shined it into the room, only to see another shadowy figure of a middle-aged man standing in the corner. Terrified, she called me, and I came to pick her up. She stayed at my place that night. The next morning, things got even stranger. Sylvia received a phone call from a distant aunt, someone she rarely spoke to. The woman claimed she was a medium and told Sylvia that a man who had visited her the night before was still with her, wanting to share a message. Sylvia refused to hear what he wanted to say, too frightened to know more. Since then, she has had no more paranormal encounters, but that night remains one of the most chilling stories I have ever heard. Story 30. In the late 1990s, when I was about 14, I spent the night at my best friend's house. We were alone, acting like foolish teenagers and messing around on America Online chat rooms. We typed bizarre nonsense to strangers just to annoy them. My friend, not thinking about online safety, had her home phone number visible on her profile. Hours later, after antagonizing some random man in a chat room, a car suddenly pulled into the driveway. Its headlights shut off, and it just sat there. At first, we thought it might be her mom, but she hesitated and realized it wasn't. We crept to her bedroom window. Just as we looked out, a large silhouette appeared inches from us, pounding on the glass and shouting, "Open up!" Panicked, we ran to the bathroom, but the man circled the house, pounding on doors, trying to get in. We wanted to call the police, but the house phone was tied up because the computer was still connected to the internet. To reach the phone, we would have had to cross the living room with the wide-open curtains, and we were too terrified. After what felt like an hour, the man finally left. We called the police, who found footprints in the backyard, but nothing else. Looking back, I am almost certain the man had traced my friend's phone number from AOL to her house. Thankfully, he never returned, but even now as an adult, I feel uneasy when I'm home alone at night. That night taught me a lesson I never forgot. Never mess with strangers on the internet. Story 31. One night in college, I was walking home through heavy fog. It was so dense I could barely see 20 feet ahead. Around 2 in the morning, I noticed a large group approaching. Not wanting to deal with drunk freshmen, I started to change my route. But then I caught sight of something strange. An American flag waving in front of the group, followed by rows of men in Union Civil War uniforms, marching 2 by 2. I thought it must be reenactors for some event, so I walked closer to ask what they were doing. But when I got within 15 feet, they vanished into the fog. Completely gone. Shaken, I rushed home and tried to sleep, but my mind kept replaying what I had seen. The next day, I thought about it more and realized they had been marching toward the football stadium, which long ago had been the site of a Union Civil War camp. The memory still gives me chills.